What if 99% of world history wasn't actually made up of deafening cannon fire? Or, dramatic speeches?
Right, or those massive cavalry charges we always see in the movies.
Exactly. What if the vast majority of the human story is just, well, agonizing, silent waiting?
Yeah, we suffer from this massive historical survivorship bias, I think. We completely condition ourselves through textbooks and blockbuster films to view the past as this continuous, action-packed highlight reel.
We really do. We dedicate all our energy to studying those explosive moments of rupture, right?
Yeah.
The battles, the assassinations, the treaties.
And in doing so, we almost entirely erase the incredibly long, mundane hours of anticipation, the stuff that actually made up the day-to-day lived experience of the people who were there.
Welcome into today's deep dive. We are taking a slightly different approach today. We're kind of turning the volume way down and stepping entirely away from the traditional timeline of troop movements and political borders.
It's a much more intimate look at history.
Yeah, so I want you, our listener, to lower the lights a bit if you can, soften the ambient noise around you, and lean into something much more atmospheric.
We are exploring this beautiful piece titled The Vigil at Ticonderoga,
Which is brought to us by Adirondack Echoes Radio, and you can find that over at thealpinehomestead.com. And really, this is an invitation to look at the psychological weight of the past.
Yeah, because it reads much more like a meditation than a standard historical account.
Right.
We're diving into a deeply sensory, almost haunting exploration of a single, highly specific, and very quiet night in the summer of 1758.
Which means we're unpacking the chilling concept of prophecy, the physiological burden of isolation, and ultimately how places themselves physically anger the memories of those who stood there, centuries before we ever arrived.
It's just a completely different way to experience a historical site.
Okay, let's unpack this. I want to pull you, our listener, directly into the physical space. So the year is 1758.
We are at Fort Ticonderoga.
Yeah, Fort Ticonderoga, this massive, heavy structure built of stone and earth and timber. And it's sitting purposefully on this rocky point where the waters narrow between two Great Lakes.
And that geography is crucial. It is a literal choke point of empires in the 18th century. It's a place vibrating with strategic tension.
But the atmosphere on this particular summer night stands in total contrast to that geopolitical weight, doesn't it?
Oh, completely. The air is completely still and cool. A low mist is drifting across the dark water like a slow breath.
You have this imposing, unmoving fortress of stone looming over this soft, creeping, almost ghostly mist.
It's incredibly cinematic, but quiet.
So quiet. Picture the isolation, right? The only sound cutting through the dark is the occasional haunting call of a loon echoing across the lake.
And the incredibly subtle, soft creak of leather as a soldier shifts his musket.
Yes. That detail, the creak of leather, is doing so much heavy lifting here.
Because if you can hear the leather of your own uniform creaking just as you breathe, the silence around you must be absolute.
Exactly. It almost reminds me of the mechanics of sensory deprivation. Have you ever spent time in one of those float tanks?
What's fascinating here is how perfectly that analogy maps onto the reality of an 18th century night watch.
Really? How so?
Well, in a float tank, you're suspended in darkness, right? Completely insulated from visual and auditory input. Your brain, which is an organ fundamentally designed to process stimuli, suddenly finds itself totally starved.
And it doesn't just power down and go to sleep.
No, not at all.
It starts hunting for input. It works overtime. We think of history as loud cannons and speeches, but wasn't 99% of history actually just people standing in the quiet, waiting?
Precisely. Neurologically, when your visual cortex and auditory processing centers are deprived of external data, they start accessing internal data.
Wow.
Your brain begins hallucinating its own reality. It pulls from memories, anxieties, and subconscious fears just to fill the void.
So take that biological mechanism and apply it to a soldier standing guard duty in 1758.
Right, because there are no floodlights out there. There's no background hum of a modern electrical grid or a distant highway.
The silence isn't just an absence of noise, it is a heavy physical presence.
It's suffocating.
I want you to imagine standing completely alone in that near-total dark, staring out at a black forest across a dark lake for hours on end, knowing that an enemy could be moving through those trees at any moment.
That kind of hypervigilance completely upends our romanticization of history, I think.
It really does. It requires a level of sustained, painful sensory sharpness that most of us will simply never experience.
Because when you are standing in that quiet...
Your mind literally has nowhere to go but inward.
Which brings us to the specific mind we're looking at tonight. The soldier keeping this solitary watch on the ramparts isn't just, a faceless uniform or a statistic in a ledger.
No, he is a young Scottish soldier named Duncan Campbell.
Inside these heavy stone walls, pacing slowly under the bright, slowly wheeling stars, he is profoundly far from home.
His mind is drifting back across the Atlantic Ocean. He's thinking of the rugged hills of Scotland.
He is missing the incredibly specific scent of peat smoke.
Yeah, that sensory memory. And remembering the voices of people he deeply loves and, honestly, worries he might never hear again.
It is a staggering degree of emotional and physical isolation. He's stationed on the very edge of what was, to him at least, an entirely alien wilderness.
Walled in by this immense homesickness. But there is another layer to his isolation, isn't there? A cognitive dissonance that is far heavier than just missing his homeland.
Oh, absolutely. This is the part of the story that really gets under your skin.
This is where we encounter the incredible core tension of Duncan's story. Because before he ever left Scotland, before he ever put on a military uniform or boarded a ship to cross the ocean, he experienced something deeply chilling.
A cousin of his. A cousin who'd already passed away, actually.
Right. This deceased cousin appeared to him in a vivid, terrifying dream. And in this dream, the ghost of his cousin delivered a very specific prophecy.
He told Duncan that he would one day meet his end at a place called Ticonderoga.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to recognize the sheer linguistic terror of that moment.
Linguistic terror is the perfect way to phrase it. At the time of the dream, the name Ticonderoga meant absolutely nothing to Duncan Campbell.
Right. It didn't sound like a Scottish word. It didn't conform to the phonetic rules of the English language he knew.
No such place existed on any map he had ever consulted. It was just this strange, seemingly meaningless collection of alien syllables handed to him in the dead of night by an apparition.
Until he gets on a boat, sails to an entirely new continent, marches deep into the unforgiving wilderness, and finds himself stationed at a newly constructed, massive stone fort.
Called Ticonderoga.
Think about the psychological horror of that realization. It's exactly like walking into a physical room that you have only ever previously seen in a recurring childhood nightmare.
Every single stone, every dark tree line, every ripple on the lake must feel like it is just dripping with preordained dread.
It is the ultimate psychological burden. He is actively grappling with the concept of a pre-written destiny.
Right, put yourself in his boots for a second. He's out there wondering whether that old, terrifying dream had been merely a trick of the subconscious, or whether certain events in our lives are written in ink before we ever even arrive at the location.
When a human being is standing on the exact geographic coordinates of their prophesied doom, how do they even function?
Well, humans are biologically wired as pattern recognition machines. We constantly look for meaning and fate in coincidence because, honestly, it gives us an illusion of control.
I have to challenge the mechanics of the supernatural element here, though. Let's look at how the brain processes trauma and fatigue.
Okay, yes.
I kept asking myself while looking at this material, did the dream actually predict the future, or did the sheer isolation of this place, the dark woods, the deep, cold water, the endless, heavy silence, simply force his exhausted mind to drag an old ghost story to the surface?
That's a fascinating angle. Did the physical environment trigger the memory, or did the memory curse the environment?
Exactly.
That is the essential question about the nature of memory itself. When a person is deeply fatigued, adrenaline depleted, and placed in an environment that feels ancient and imposing, the lines between memory, fear, and reality begin to blur heavily.
Especially out there alone in the dark.
The environment here is described as feeling very old and very quiet. In that state, it is entirely plausible that Duncan was projecting his own internal existential dread outward onto the misty landscape.
The landscape became a mirror for his anxiety.
Yeah, precisely.
And the landscape is certainly playing its part in this psychological drama. Let's look at the climax of his watch. Duncan reaches the end of his patrol along the stone wall.
The mist coming off the dark lake is thick and completely obscuring the shoreline.
And then, out of nowhere, he sees a shape moving right at the water's edge.
It's a man in a dark coat, standing perfectly still in the shifting mist.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because in any other narrative, in any Hollywood adaptation of this moment, this is where the music swells dramatically, right?
Oh, for sure. The violins come in.
This is the moment Duncan raises his heavy musket, shouts a loud challenge into the dark, and the battle officially begins. The timeline of history is written.
But what does he actually do?
He blinks. He simply blinks, and the shape is gone.
It just vanishes into the mist just as quickly as it materialized.
What happens next is what makes this piece of historical exploration so brilliant to me.
Because absolutely nothing happens.
Nothing. The night remains completely calm. No alarm is raised to wake the garrison. Not a single shot is fired into the dark.
Duncan Campbell finishes his solitary watch, turns around, walks inside the stone barracks, and lies down on his narrow, uncomfortable cot.
It is a breathtaking anticlimax.
It really is, but as a lens through which to view history, it is absolutely perfect. This moment forces us to confront the profound significance of what doesn't happen. Let's go back to that idea of survivorship bias in history we talked about at the start. If our history books are solely a record of the shots that were fired, a story like this serves as a monument to the thousands of times a soldier blinked, lowered his weapon, and consciously decided that a threat was just a shadow.
The history of the unfired shot. That changes everything about how we view these spaces.
It reframes everything.
Our entire timeline of the world is based on the moments people failed to keep the peace or decided they had to act. We have almost no record of the immense human restraint of non-action.
But it also leaves us with this incredible, lingering ambiguity about Duncan's internal state.
Did he genuinely believe the man in the dark coat was a French scout gathering intelligence? Or did he believe in his bones that it was the ghost of his cousin coming to collect on a prophecy of death?
We don't know. We just don't know. The historical record cannot penetrate that deeply into the human mind, and this exploration leans heavily into that fundamental unknowability.
We can reconstruct the architecture of the fort perfectly. We know the exact dates of the campaigns. We know the logistics of the supplies.
But we rarely, if ever, have access to the intimate internal thoughts of the people who actually lived through it.
Oh.
Some local legends claim Duncan remembered the terrifying old dream that night, lying awake on his cot in a cold sweat of dread.
But other accounts suggest he slept completely peacefully, with the gentle, rhythmic lapping of the lake against the stones acting as a lullaby. We don't know what was happening in Duncan's heart when he finally closed his eyes. The human dramas, the acute fears, the crushing homesickness, the weight of prophecies, they are all fleeting.
They burn bright for a moment, and then they're gone.
But the physical landscape endures.
This is how the narrative resolves that tension between human anxiety and deep time. The human element fades, but the fort kept its watch.
The water kept its secrets.
Yeah, the stars just kept wheeling slowly overhead above the Adirondack night, entirely indifferent to the geopolitical struggles or the personal nightmares of the men below them.
Which brings us beautifully out of the summer of 1758 and right into the present day.
Right, because this isn't just a fairy tale set in a mythical, inaccessible kingdom.
No, this deep dive makes a very powerful, very direct claim to you, the listener. It notes that if you are listening near a fire right now, or sitting by a window with the lights low, you need to know that places like this still exist in the real world.
It is a tangible invitation to physical connection. The past isn't trapped behind glass in a museum somewhere.
You can literally go there. You can travel to that exact rocky choke point between the two Great Lakes.
You can stand your own watch on the very same ground where Duncan Campbell paced in the dark.
You can look up at the exact same slowly wheeling stars, hear the exact same haunting call of the loons echoing across the water, and look out over the very same mist.
Adirondack Echoes Radio, through the alpinehomestead.com, actively invites people to stay and play a little longer, specifically to experience this profound geographical connection for themselves.
So, what does this all mean? When we synthesize the terrifying mechanism of sensory deprivation, the psychology of a prophesied fate, and this modern invitation to visit, where do we land?
We arrive at a vital realization about the persistence of memory, I think. History is not just a collection of abstract dates memorized for a test or ink printed on a page.
It is physically anchored to the earth.
It's tactile. It's a geographical reality that you can reach out and touch. The past does not disappear. It simply waits, quiet as mist on the lake, for someone to remember it.
The landscape itself absorbs these seemingly insignificant moments of quiet human endurance.
Duncan Campbell's lonely vigil, his acute fears about his destiny, his sensory memories of peat smoke, they didn't just evaporate into the ether.
They soaked into the heavy stones of Ticonderoga and the deep waters of Lake Champlain, quietly waiting for anyone willing to stand still enough and be quiet enough to sense them. To distill our journey today, we started by confronting our own bias, expecting the loud, explosive, cinematic noise of history. We instinctively looked for the smoke of the cannons and the shouting of the generals.
But instead, We found ourselves transported back to 1758, standing on a misty, cold rampart, listening to the subtle creak of leather.
We explored the crushing psychological weight carried by a young Scottish soldier far from home, grappling with the cognitive dissonance of a ghost's prophecy, staring at a shape in the mist that simply vanished.
We uncover the history of the unfired shot, recognizing that the quiet moments of the past, those invisible vigils, are just as foundational to the human story as the loud ones.
The water truly does keep its secrets, but it willingly shares the atmosphere of those secrets with anyone who makes the journey to visit.
It really does.
And we followed that profound silence all the way to the modern day, to you, the listener, who can still stand by those same dark waters. If you want to explore more of these incredible historical echoes and find out how to visit, you can check out Adirondack Echoes Radio at alpinehomestead.com.
Highly recommend it.
Which leaves me with one final thought I want to pass on to you to mull over. We've spent this entire time talking about how a major, globally famous historical site like Fort Ticonderoga is defined not just by its recorded battles, but by its unrecorded, forgotten, agonizingly quiet hours.
Defined by a single man standing in the dark, wrestling with his own mind.
I want you to think about the land beneath your own home right now, or the specific stretch of ground you cover on your daily commute.
Well, that's a great thought.
If history is truly anchored to the earth, quietly waiting like mist for someone to remember it, what invisible, silent vigils were kept on the exact geographic coordinates where you are sitting right now?
Long before the roads were paved.
Exactly. Long before the modern buildings went up and the streetlights turned on, who stood in the dark on your plot of land, waiting anxiously for the morning. What local ghosts or quiet fears or forgotten dreams are waiting in the mist of your own hometown, just waiting for someone to remember them? Next time you hear the wind moving through the trees outside your window, maybe listen a little closer. Thank you for taking this journey with us. Let the day settle, and we'll see you next time.